Welcome to Internet Routing with a side of VPN. Though, as this worked out, the side of VPN will be a secondary presentation. Okay, so the basics. How does the Internet work? And in this case, we're talking how does the Internet work with regard to routing requests and moving data around the Internet. We'll start with a map of the United States. Let's talk about this basic idea. Your computer over there in California is connected to the internet, and it needs to ask another computer, in this case, somewhere on the East Coast, for a web page. You want to ask that computer to show you a web page. That computer will send back the website information for you to view. It might look something like this. That blue question mark represents your request. In that particular case, it might be the http://www.google.com that you have typed into your browser. So it'll look like this. Your computer sends the request, it goes across the country, hits the website, and then the website will send a result back. Well, looks like you were looking for cat videos. Simple, right? Let's dive into this. Here's what one company's internet backbone looks like. Kind of looks like a highway system. The green lines represent fiber cable that is running across the country. In some cases, there may be some wireless connections in there. There could be many other things. And then the orange dots represent cities where the cable actually stops to service the city. We'll get into that a little bit later. So now we have our request, and when we do that request, you'll see that it has to traverse through a number of cities in order to find its way to the website. So it's taking kind of a meandering path, but it makes it to the city. And then the website is going to respond with your cat video or your cat picture. So that is going to come back, but notice it may take a different path getting home. We'll talk about that a little bit. All right. But that's only one backbone provider network. That is one company who owns all of those cables. There are many internet providers who have backbones across the world, and again, we're talking the United States here because those are easier maps. So here we're going to show 3 different backbone providers. These maps may or may not be accurate and up to date. That's not the point. We're going to show you how this works. Okay? So your web page request may need to go between multiple companies, multiple backbone providers in order to service your request. So let's say your computer is again in California on the internet backbone to the upper left, and the web page you're trying to get to is hosted by a completely different company down in Florida on the mid-right. Your request may look something like this. It starts at your home, and it travels your network until it needs to hop to another network, and we'll talk about why it might need to hop. So it hits a point, and it's like, I can't get to where I need to. So it hops over to another internet backbone company. That internet backbone company will go ahead and carry the request as it's trying to find a path to where it needs to go. It hits down here in Houston, and you can kind of tell that there's not a path from Houston, from that backbone company in the dark blue, down to Florida. So it hands your request off to yet a third backbone company. That backbone company says, I know how to get to Houston. And it sends your request to Houston. I don't show it here, but the same thing will happen on the way back. The packet will go across the Qwest nationwide network until it hits a place where it can no longer figure out how to get to your home. It will hand it off to other internet backbones, and eventually the request, the cat picture, will make it back to your house. So who are these big boys? The companies that own the big cross-country backbones, typically with fiber optic networks, are companies like Qwest, AT&T, Sprint, and others. These companies have what are called peering agreements, and they will hand off traffic to each other to make sure that the internet is served and to make sure that the data can get where it needs to go. Okay? These names change a little bit. I put level 3 on here. They don't exist anymore. They're now part of CenturyLink, but hey, I'm too lazy to update this diagram. Okay? And like I said, as you can see, they connect to each other so that they can make sure that the data gets where it needs to go. So now let's go back to the basics. You see some of all these internet backbone providers in some cities. So looking at these maps, I know it's hard to tell with this resolution. All 3 of these providers are in San Francisco, they're all in Denver, they're all in Houston, and they're all in many other cities. These places where all of the backbone providers converge, they're called network peering points. These are the places where, since the backbone providers connect to each other, they can hand off requests between each other and allow that request to move on to the next network. Think of it as, well, I don't know what to think of it as. Just trust me on that. Okay? In the last section, we showed your request hop from one map to the other. That's what happens in a network peering point. So if you look at the upper left-hand map, you'll see that light blue dot. And then we showed that light blue dot go, oh, I need to be on a different network. So it goes from Seattle on one network to Seattle on another network, and then it can go on to the other network until it finds its way either to a path to its destination or to your home. In this example, some of these networks don't hit the same cities. So Phoenix isn't represented by all three, Boise isn't represented by all three, and Minneapolis. So if your packet needs to go to a city that isn't represented by all three, obviously one of these backbone providers is going to have to be willing to hand that request off to another backbone provider that does go to those cities. We'll kind of talk about that in the next diagram. So how does the internet know where your stuff needs to go? Okay, this is my IP address. You can go to a website called whatismyip.com and it'll tell you your IP address. In this case, mine is 209.212.56. I covered it up with poop just because I'm trying to be a little bit private. My IP location is Castle Rock, which is not completely true. My ISP is Arix LLP. As it turns out, Arix LLP actually services a lot of the IP addresses, a lot of the smaller networks for Comcast, since Comcast is a big nationwide company. Each IP address is part of a network. So my IP address, 209.212.56.boop. You look at the left more parts of it. In this case, 209.212 is the network that I'm on. And then all the other computers that have 209.212.whatever.whatever, they're all part of the same network. Each network is owned by an internet provider. So now, let's go back to the map. Your computer sends a request, okay? From this example, we're going to call the computer in California 12.200.123.67. And we're going to call the one you're requesting from 73.71.66.13. Okay, those seem kind of random, but they'll serve a point here. All right. Now, if we look, the one that you're trying to connect to, 73.71.66.13, let's look at the leftmost number, 73. And we can see that that IP address is part of the Comcast network because Comcast owns everything that starts with a 73. Then our own computer, in this example, which is 12.200.123.67, we look at the leftmost number, also called the leftmost octet, and we can see that that computer would belong to the AT&T network. All right, so now we understand that in order to make a request from our 12.200.123.67 computer, we're going to have to hop from the AT&T network over to the Comcast network. Here we go. 12.200.123.67 and then 73.71.66.13. So our packet leaves our computer and it's traveling along the AT&T network and eventually it hits a spot where it realizes it can't get where it needs to go. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So it hits one of these peering points and that peering point says, I know how to get where you need to, so I'm going to switch you over to the Comcast network. So it follows the Comcast network, and then the Comcast internet routers are able to get it to the place where it needs to go. Okay? Simple, right? Now let's show a little bit more detail. So now we've got the same two, the 12 network and the 73 network. Again, the left network is, I believe, AT&T. The right one was Comcast. I could have those backwards. So it goes up to the next hop in the network, but then it hits a router. And it's going to ask that router, do you know where I need to go? Now this router may have many connections coming to it from many cities. In this case, I'm being lazy and I'm only drawing two connections, one connection on each side. This router goes to the next one, and you can see it's hitting routers in all these cities, and they get to where we need to go. But what's happening at those routers? Oh, hi. Let's talk about that. It hits the first router, and the router says, stuff I know how to find. I know that the 12.200 network is to the south. Now, it doesn't understand direction. It just knows that it's on that particular connection. I know that 12.200.0.0 is to the south. However, that's where you came from. You're going to 73.71.66.13. It knows that's not to the south because it has a big table of networks. So it says, well, 12.100 is here in my city, and you're also not trying to hit a 12.100 network. Everything else, we're going to go north to the next hop, and we're going to ask him. So it goes up to the next one. And he says, I know how to find 12.200 and 12.100. They're to the south of me. 12.20 is here in my city, but you're not asking for 12.20. So everything else, let's go ahead and go over to the next hop appearing point over in Denver. So it goes to Denver. And Denver says, stuff I know how to find. Well, I know that 12.everything you can get to up to the northwest. And realistically, it'll probably have a couple of connections to 12.everything going out various directions. But again, simplified map. It knows 12.everything is to the northwest. 73.everything is over on the Comcast network. So this is where Comcast and AT&T have peered, and the router will handle the traffic between the two. So the router sees the traffic coming from the AT&T network. AT&T does not claim to own those addresses, but Comcast does, so it hops it over from the black network, in my diagram, over to a red network. So it says, let's go ahead and move it over to the Comcast network. It hits a peering point. The Comcast network goes through the same logic. I didn't draw it out. It says, well, I know where the 73 network is. I know the next hop to the 73 network is here. And this guy says, oh, I know the next hop to the 73 network is here. And you have arrived. Okay, so the point is each of these little circles has a list of what networks, not individual IPs, but what networks it's connected to, so it knows how to forward your packet where it needs to go. Now, once it gets down to an individual city, you actually follow the same thing. So when we got to the East Coast there, now that the packets traversing the internet, now they have to go to individual buildings, they have to go to individual segments of the city, and it does the same thing. Each one of these blue and red routers is maintaining a list of networks they connect to. They're going to be much smaller networks, okay, but it's going to find ways, they're going to talk to each other, and they're going to explain, oh, I know how to get to this network, I know how to get to that network, and eventually they will let the packet get down to the exact space that it needs to go. Of course, it's much more complicated. Okay. So the basics. Every internet router maintains a long list called a routing table of all the networks that it's directly connected to. And each router automatically updates every other router that it's connected to and tells that router, here's what I have access to, just in case you're wondering. Each routing table also maintains a list of, if I don't know how to reach a network or an IP address, I have a default route that I will send that to. So each router says, I may not know the answer, but I know a guy who does, or I can get you closer to a guy who does. So it will send that packet that it doesn't know where it goes out its default route to the next router. Maybe that router will know how to find it. Most routers maintain lists with multiple ways to get to another network. Again, kind of like Google Maps. This route may be slower, or there's a crash ahead. I'll send you on a different route. Remembering our earlier maps when we showed many network paths going to network cities, and I explained that your request may go through one set of cities and the response may go through another. This is for that very reason. They need to be able to take multiple paths, and at any point in time, it might change its idea as to which way it's going to go based on how much traffic is on the internet outages, time of day, and many other things that will impact. The last thing to keep in mind, a request. Say you're asking for a web page, you're filling out a form on a web page, or you're asking Netflix for a movie. Or a response, the Netflix movie it sends you. A web page like news.google.com or Google Maps. Those are all broken into smaller pieces called packets. So that request is not just one thing going across the network. It's usually a request is a lot of text that it has to break up into multiple little packets, or you can think of multiple cars going across the internet. Since they're in multiple groups, each packet may take a different route to get to the destination. The more routers each packet goes through, the more likely that those routers will make different decisions on figuring out how to get those packets where they need to be. So obviously, if you have route packets taking different routes, they might get to their destination at different times. So because of this, each packet has a sequence number. And when a computer receives the packets, let's say that's your PC receiving a video stream from Netflix, your PC waits until he has enough packets so that it can put them in the right order so that they make sense so that it can play the movie. If your computer gets packets out of order, it will wait for the right one to show up. Sometimes you'll see this as maybe a little spinning circle or something indicating that your computer is sitting there waiting for the right packet. That doesn't always mean that the internet connection is slow. That may literally mean that a packet got corrupted or a packet got lost on the way, and your computer is sitting there waiting, and eventually your computer is going to say, you know what, I'm missing some packets. Try it again. That is called packet loss. And there we go. The end of part 1, Internet Routing Basics. In part 2, we'll actually talk about how this is leveraged in order to create a virtual private network between two companies on the internet in such a way that other people cannot snoop on their traffic, other people can't predict their traffic, and it keeps their traffic secure.